I have to say I'm confused because I would have expected more from Europe. Of course, Europe is divided internally. There is a lot of anti-war sentiment in Europe. Most vocally, Prime Minister Orban of Hungary, Prime Minister Fico of Slovakia. There will be a new government in Czech Republic, most likely, that will be an anti-war government later this year. So the old Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg lands, are going to be pretty much united against this war. There are lots of voices all over Europe that want the war to end. That's what public opinion polls show. But the political leaders, not so much. And in fact, they go down to defeat one after another, those who have been prosecuting this war. So European leaders became very unpopular during this period. Of course, the economy suffered tremendously by the cut-off low-cost natural gas from Russia. This sent the German economy into contraction. That spiraled to the rest of Europe. Energy costs have soared. Governments are unpopular. In Germany, the SPD ruling party was shockingly collapsed in its public support in the recent poll. Macron is very unpopular in France. So what's puzzling, why I say I'm confused, is that these politicians are not following public opinion. They're not acting like politicians trying to maximize public support or the vote. What are they doing exactly? I had interpreted, and still basically do interpret, the last 30 years as U.S.-led, a U.S.-led adventure of unipolarity that was manifest most explicitly in NATO enlargement, and that Europe reluctantly signed on to that. What we think we know from events like the Bucharest summit in 2008 of NATO, Chancellor Merkel, President Sarkozy of France were resistant to following the U.S. line of NATO enlargement, and especially a clear commitment, a roadmap for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. So they were resistant, but they dropped their resistance at the Bucharest summit under pressure from the United States, and then acceded to the U.S. approach. And that included Europe agreeing to the coup and the fact that the United States actively promoted regime change in February 2014. And actually, the United States recognized a government brought in by a violent coup a day after European foreign ministers had negotiated almost exactly the opposite, a continuation of the Yanukovych government for many months until there would be national elections later in 2014. So the Europeans folded their hand on February 22nd, 2014, and went the American route. So my interpretation has been that America led what I have called a game. It was a game of U.S. expansion, U.S. unipolarity, U.S. Aiming to weaken and extend Russia. The word extend Russia is the word that the Rand Corporation used in 2019 to say, do everything you can to weaken, annoy, undermine Russia. What a policy, by the way, just mind-boggling that adults should behave like children in this reckless manner. But that's what they did. Now, Europe suddenly is given a prospect that this absurd, failed, disastrous approach will end. And they say, no way, no way. It continues. We'll continue the war. Of course, they can't continue the war. Even with the United States, Russia was winning the war on the battlefield and wasn't going to be defeated. Europe by itself, it's preposterous to talk in the terms that they are speaking. So to come back to your question and my confusion, why is Europe missing the moment? Now, I think that there are several obvious things to say. First, Europe institutionally doesn't have a foreign policy. its 27 countries. The EU does not have, under the rules of the game of the European Union, does not have even the power to have a foreign policy. Whether it would be a good one or not is a question, but the foreign policy is essentially what comes out of decisions of 27 disparate countries. So that's a first point. Second, there is absolute fear in the Baltic states because the Baltic states have been depending on the United States to back them up. And with the U.S. backing them up, they thought they could be as nasty towards the Russians as they wanted, rhetorically, even to their own ethnic Russian populations, trying to ban the Russian language or Russian schools, because they thought the United States was standing with them. So these tiny countries have been the most vociferous, Russophobic of all countries. How would you behave that way? Well, they counted on the U.S. to have the big club that was going to protect them. And now the U.S. isn't protecting them. So they are in a panic, definitely. And to my mind, what these countries, the Baltic states, were doing in recent years, it was so dangerous. If you have a powerful neighbor, don't spend every day attacking it, damning it, hating it, trying to undermine it, saying it should break into pieces. If you're tiny and you have a big neighbor next door, don't even talk that way. Be clever. Have statecraft. But they thought, oh, the United States will protect us so we can be as loud and nasty as possible. Okay, now they really are panicking. But how can anyone explain the words of the Danish prime minister? I can't. Every theory I have, if I were the Danish prime minister and I was worried about an invasion by a great power, I'd absolutely be worried about the United States of America, because Donald Trump has expressed very vividly his eyes on Greenland. I don't think President Putin expressed his voracious appetite for Greenland or for Denmark. In fact, I know that he obviously has not, but Donald Trump has. And so if you're the prime minister of Denmark and your job is national security, how can you be taking this kind of line that continued war is best, and so much oblivious to what the real changing geopolitics is for your country? I find it extremely confusing or maybe confusing isn't the right word. I find it very dismaying that there is such incoherence in the European approach. Now, that was long-winded answer to say that there are probably many factors that explain the incoherence of Europe right now. I can say at one level, I've been saying to the European leaders for years, open a direct discussion with Moscow. This is what you need to do for many different points of view: to end the war, to achieve collective security, to have a new security arrangement in Europe, to understand the different points of view. This is the one thing that has not happened until today. They don't get that. They seem to like to travel to Kyiv for their photo opportunities. God knows why they regard that as a photo opportunity. It's a disaster, this approach. But they don't aim for diplomacy with Russia. Now, the United States is actively in diplomacy with Russia, and this is a good thing for the world, and a good thing for Europe, and a good thing for Ukraine. But even then, Europe doesn't say, oh, we need to open our own channels. Instead, Europe begs the United States, let us be at the table. You know, the EU has more people than the United States. The European Union is closer to Russia, of course, geographically. It has more at stake. Why does the EU need to go through the United States begging for a place to discuss with Russia? Why doesn't it open a discussion directly with Russia, which the Russian government has said repeatedly Of course, it's open to.